Hi, everybody, and welcome to a special edition episode of our podcast, Red Light, Green Light. Today, I bring you an exclusive, an exciting guest, a remarkable leader in the field of innovation for the last 50-plus years, Alan Patricof. Known in the industry as the grandfather of venture capital, Alan Patricof is the author of No Red Lights, a book title similar to mine, and a book that's perfectly capturing how he sees the world with no red lights. The world to Alan, as you'll see, is full of opportunity, momentum, and growth. Alan entered the world of VC when it was still being defined. He's the founder of Apex Partners, which today manages more than $50 billion globally, and has gone on to create additional firms as well. You may know the companies he's backed: AOL, Apple, Audible, New York Magazine, and many, many more, including those in the theater industry earlier on. From his first job at 63 Wall Street in 1965 to founding firms that now manage billions, Alan has been building, backing, and believing in innovative ideas long before they became obvious. Today, he's 90 years young, recently completed the New York City Marathon, and is not done yet looking for green lights. Alan has helped shape the very image I refer to as the flagpole of innovation. From the bottom to the top, Alan has spotted talent, funded the vision of founders, and scaled possibility. As our listeners know, I've traveled that same flagpole from another angle as a messaging strategist, helping founders and scientists communicate clearly enough to earn their green lights from people just like Alan. Alan, after reading your book, it was clear that you and I share a belief that clarity in messaging is key, that messaging that balances head and heart and has character or ethos is critical. Alan, your book is full of stories that stick, and I'm excited to get to a few of those today. To start, I'd like to ask you to rewind for us a bit. Take us into the elevator, or maybe it was the stairs, at 63 Wall Street in New York City in July of 1965, when you went for your first job interview.
In hindsight, I couldn't have picked a better quality firm, which a firm no one had ever heard of at the time, or subsequently. It's called Ness and Thomas, which was an investment counseling firm. And the receptionist said, "Let me check." That's all it was. And out came a guy who was the prototypical Yaley with blue shirt and suspenders and mustache. Very, very elegant guy, I recall. And he interviewed me, and I honestly, to this day, can't understand why he hired me, because I certainly wasn't anything like a Yaley. I mean, I was, suit and tie and all that, which is what the uniform everybody wore in those days. And then I remember he then turned me over to some other people coming in. Hi. I'm just doing a podcast, if you don't mind.
No, it's okay. Do it.
So they then sent me on to two other people, and I had these two. So I ended up with three interviews, and then I got it, which was surprising at the time.
And you were a securities analyst, is that correct?
Well,
that's what you were working on?
That's what I was applying for at the time.
Yes.
And they actually had one person who was working at that time in that capacity. I was the second person.
Okay.
It was a very small firm. I mean, I don't think there were more than 7 or 8 people working in the whole firm. It grew while I was there. I was there for 2 years. And from 55 to 57, I'm just trying to think. During that time, no, it was, I want to get my dates right. It was 55 to 57. And then I was recruited away by, don't ask me why, another firm which was in the development capital business. The first one was investment counseling. The second one was the development capital. And there, God, I don't know why I don't know why I got any of these jobs.
Well, that's kind of why, when I was reading through that, what I often share with leaders is about how, when I say to them as they prepare their messages, what do you hope that when you leave the room that day, what do you hope the person across the table from you is going to think about you? And what do you hope they're going to think about your message? So you must have you must have gripped them, Alan, in some fashion with something that we would now call executive presence or skills or something of that nature. Maybe it was excitement. I just wondered if you could put a finger on any of
No,
that.
I was 21 years old. No, excuse me, 1955. Yeah, I was 21 years old. I mean, how
Okay.
much could I have had to offer at 21? And the next one, I was 23.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and I don't think, and I don't know whether they were interviewing 10 others,
Right.
or whether I just happened to hit an
Yeah.
opening. I mean,
Right.
I would, in today's world, I never would have gotten either of those jobs. Uh, the next job I got, which was in
Bless you.
1960, uh, there I do remember I was interviewed, and that time by then I had, 3 or 4 years of experience,
Sure.
and they were, in all these cases, I was really, I guess you'd say, a security analyst.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but in the second and third case, I was really doing more than analyzing a situation. We were in the second firm,
Mm-hmm.
called Lambert and Company. We were
Yep.
making investments in situations. I mean, one of the things we did was to come up with an idea of financing a bridge across the Tagus River outside of Lisbon, and to
Mm-hmm.
back it up with the gold reserves of
Yep.
Portugal,
Yep. I
which had a
remember that.
very high gold reserve compared to the net worth of the assets of the country, and
Mm-hmm.
I worked on a new telecontrol company, and I worked on a finance company. And in all those cases, we were investors in these
Mm-hmm.
situations.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, uh, when I went to the third firm, which was called Central National Corporation, there it was purely investing in public companies.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and That's where I got my taste for
Yeah.
investing in private companies, because uh, in circumstances like this, was a family group, not my family, but every family with a high net worth had most of their money in the stock and bond market, but occasionally they would be offered participations
Mm-hmm.
in private companies, and I took a liking to that. I saw private companies and the involvement you would have in those companies much more realistic and intimate, and
Right.
I felt much more involved in investing and getting really in the inside of a company, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to buying and selling General Motors or IBM stock.
Right.
And that's where I developed my fascination for the private market, non-public market.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it was, that experience, coupled with some investment banking experience,
Right.
that enabled me to start my own firm in uh, really 1970,
Mm-hmm.
December 69.
Right. Right.
And there, no one interviewed me. I just became my own entrepreneur.
Yes.
By then I was
Yes.
36 years old.
But you had a
Uh,
lot of contacts and you had built so many great relationships by that point in time that you just sent out some letters on some nice letterhead and found out that you could kind of start your own company and get the backing that you needed from some really good relationships you had built for
exactly,
decades. Yeah.
exactly. As a matter of fact, you said a nice letterhead. The interesting part is, I was always somewhat creative,
Hmm.
innovative, and
Yeah.
the truth is that I developed a stationery that was made out of I don't know where we got it. It was brown paper.
Okay.
It wasn't standard paper. I don't know if we cut it up.
Mm-hmm.
It was square. It was brown or tan, and it
Yep.
had a border around it. And I decided no one would ever forget getting that
That's
stationery.
right.
And
Some stuff worked.
I wish I had some place in some records
Yeah.
that stationery would, but I don't.
That original
But
letter. Right.
it was
Right.
really an original letter, an original stationery, and with an original idea,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's
Absolutely. Well, Alan, I have a question about some of the places you found yourself in where you had to convince and cajole a bunch of investors to kind of keep an idea moving. And one that caught my attention was the New York Times. You mentioned in
New
your, oh,
York
sorry, New York
Magazine.
Magazine. New York Magazine, you said, I had to go back to investors and cajole and convince them to put up another $1.5 million after an early kind of souring of the magazine early on. How did you position that? Do you remember back to what you were putting in front of those investors to get
I
that money?
I honestly, in hindsight, would have to say it was my persuasiveness. I
Yeah,
because it wasn't based on financial results. It
yeah.
was based on a belief and the ability to persuade. I mean, I believed in the concept of the magazine. I believed in its
Hmm.
prospect. I believed in the people who were running it, and I, I did that, by the way, before I started my own firm,
Hmm.
right before. And if the
Hmm.
reason I say is because the art director of New York Magazine is the person who designed this stationery for me.
Right. Oh, okay. Right. Yes.
That's how I
Right.
know the
Right.
sequence. And
Yes.
but when I raised this second round, uh, it was sheer persuasiveness and uh, I guess being effective as a salesperson.
Yeah. Like a vision that you must have had. What was your vision for New York Magazine at that time that you
Well,
wanted it to do?
I saw it becoming the forerunner of what became a series of city magazines, which
Okay.
developed in Cleveland and Boston and Los Angeles and Texas.
Yeah.
I don't know about Florida, but there were at least a half dozen and maybe more city magazines that came up as a
Yeah.
result of that.
Yeah, that was incredible. And it's something that you hold very dear to you, I know, as a New Yorker, someone who's been living there, working there for as long as you have.
But when we started, it really had a different kind of role. When we started New York Magazine, there were no other city magazines.
Hmm.
There was nothing else like it, and it became very quickly. If you didn't read New York Magazine this week, you didn't know what was happening,
Right,
whether
right,
it was in fashion or movies or television or music or concert. You know, how to live and succeed in New York
right.
is, all which contained a lot of great literary writers,
Hmm.
uh, and uh, it was just it was a big became very big and fat, and every
Hmm.
advertiser had to advertise. Uh, it's not quite today. It still exists. It
Hmm.
still gets recognition. I don't know what its circulation is, but it doesn't have the same role in New York that it did at that time.
Right, right. Well, you had it during the heyday, no question about that.
Yeah,
Alan, I wanted to ask you about some science companies that you invested in. A lot of my clients are in science and technology, and they really have a lot of they have a tough time communicating something very complex in simplistic terms. And there was one company that I noted here in the late 60s, Cartatron. Datascope.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
when you were really taken by this concept and this process, I believe it was Larry who was able to eventually pivot that and really get to the market which was the hospitals and not the doctors. But you liked that idea. You found it to be clear and compelling. And that's difficult. That's really difficult for a lot of scientists and technologists to achieve, is that level of, oh, I get it, right? When you don't understand an idea, you're not going to invest in it. So can you walk me through a little of what you do remember from that time with Larry and that product?
Well, that's a company I was involved with virtually. If it wasn't day one, it was day two. I mean,
Right. Okay.
the person who was the founder of it, who was a scientist or a I say an engineer,
Mm-hmm.
technologist, he
Mm-hmm.
had this idea of a synchronous scope, which
Mm-hmm.
meant it's very simple to explain. Is in a scope that you read, if you've ever even been in your own doctor's office,
Sure.
if you have a signal coming across the scope, if there's no change in your arrhythmia and your heartbeat is the same, it's one line
Mm-hmm.
up and
Mm-hmm.
down, but it's the same. But if you have an anomaly, all of a sudden, and he developed this concept of a frozen trace, which meant when it went across one time, it kind of stayed in the background, and the
Mm-hmm.
next, and if it was the same, it came out the same. But you could see if there was any deviation,
Right.
it immediately became apparent. And he also, at the same time, came up with the idea you didn't need to have a scope that was a foot long. You could accomplish the same thing with a 2-inch screen
Right.
because
Right.
there was nothing wrong with you. There's no deviation, and if
Mm-hmm.
there's something wrong, you can catch it very quickly, and
Right.
it was a lot less expensive than using a typical oscilloscope
Mm-hmm.
to display something which would cost a lot more money. This scope costs very little to produce, and he came up with this idea that in those days doctors had carried around doctors' visiting bags,
Right.
black bags with a handle, and I guess they carried Band-Aids, and they carried this device. But he found out very, very quickly that the world was changing, and doctors weren't visiting people at home anymore. And
Right.
if he kept on selling to that market, it would have gone broke. And he came up with this idea almost by accident that there was another market for the anesthesiologist
Right.
who didn't have a scope.
Right.
He depended on the scope of the surgeon, and so he started developing, modifying the device, putting a tripod on it, grounding it, and going after a different market.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
a company was built on that concept.
Yeah. Yeah. Alan, do you find that he was pretty easily prepared? Was it pretty easy for him to get those stakeholders at the audience or at the hospital level to hit go? Was it easy for them once
No,
they
no,
saw it,
no,
or was it hard?
no, it wasn't easy because it was a new idea. Uh,
Right.
you were selling to an anesthesiologist in the hospital, and everyone would say, you know, why does the anesthesiologist need a scope?
Hmm.
And
Right.
he sold, I guess, maybe partly on their ego of
Okay.
saying you need we need it, and it wasn't that big an expense that they could convince their department head that they should buy it, and pretty soon, if one or two people had it, everybody had to have it.
Well, then you became the front runner doctor who had access to something new and revolutionary and innovative, and you were, as you said, they played to the ego, which is that's a persuasive technique, 100%, absolutely. When you look at pitches now, Alan, that are in some of these complex arenas of science, tech, AI, when you're listening to those, or if you can think of some that you've heard, what are you listening for that's going to guide you toward that ability, for them to for you to hit go? Like what drives you to, yeah, I'm interested in learning more about this idea. I like the leader. It's a good argument. Is there storytelling that's compelling to you? What drives you to really want to say yes to an innovator after they've pitched you?
Well, I don't think anything drives me to it. I mean, you're responding to the presenter.
Right.
You're presenting. You're responding to the logic of the concept behind what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You're verifying that they really have developed original technology
Mm-hmm.
and that it has some protection around it, not necessarily a patent, but whether it's the design or it's, in the case of Larry Saper's device, it was, I don't think we even had patents. I think it was just the application and technology sold itself. Ultimately, I think we got it patented, but what it's not patents that will convince me to invest in something. Just definitely not. It's. I think if the project makes sense, if there's not in a high one of many, but it has some competitive distinction around it. Larry's technology of this miniature scope was very novel
Mm-hmm.
at the time, and my guess is we did file a patent on that on the modified scope size.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think when you hear a presentation about any kind of new technology, a lot of it has to do with the person,
Right.
less
Right.
less the product. I mean, I'd much rather have a person who's got good ideas than a product without a person to run it.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
you talk a lot about that and how betting on the don't bet on the horse, bet on the jockey, right?
yeah, yeah.
And can you talk a little more about that, Alan, in terms of how you determine those really on fire leaders? Because you do a good amount of discussion of that in your book, and you're clearly really people centered, and you really have an eye for who's doing great things in the world, who's really innovative and creative. Tell us more
Well,
about that.
if you have a great product and it doesn't and it doesn't work, uh, what do you do? I mean, you can throw it away. Whereas if you have an individual who can has a great idea and the idea doesn't work, the product doesn't work. If you've got the right kind of person, they can figure out what they do, what, how to do it differently, or how to
Mm-hmm.
modify. I hate to use the word pivot, but pivoting is part of it. Larry Saper
Yep.
was a perfect example. He
Mm-hmm.
developed something. He could have easily gone down to the sea in ships,
Mm-hmm.
trying to beat his head against the wall to sell
Mm-hmm.
doctors, and he would have sold them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he would have sold them, but nothing like the explosive growth that developed
Right.
by by aha. There's another market, and I can take the same product, improvise it, and
Right.
I think that is very important for lots of new
Yeah.
technologies.
Right.
If because it never works quite the way you'd like it from the
Mm-hmm.
outset. So in the
Right.
end of the day, you've got to have someone who knows how to do something with it.
Right. Right. Do you have a person in mind that really knocked your socks off with a presentation and made you feel like that person was would aside from Larry or some others, is there a couple people that stick in your mind as having really stuck the landing, so to speak, with a pitch or a presentation of sorts?
Uh, oh God, there've been so many. Uh,
Thousands,
I guess
probably.
the concept around Audible uh,
Yes. Okay.
would made so much sense that those days people were carrying Walkman, and
Yes, I remember.
this was product for the Walkman, and you
Right.
had to get people to you know uh, have take the idea of not just playing music, but
Mm-hmm.
that books were a real possibility. And
Mm-hmm.
he came up with the idea of going to publishers and saying, in addition to making money out of your print edition, I'll do the audio
Yeah.
version, and I'll give you royalties. Uh, and what the breakthrough there in that company was, he initially used a Walkman, then he developed his own product,
Mm-hmm.
which was a big mistake in that it was too costly, and you had to not only now sell the concept of the Audible book listening experience, but you also had to sell them and buy a new device. And
Mm-hmm.
what happened when the iPad, iPhone, no iPhone,
Yep.
what was it?
Oh,
Um,
the
uh,
iPod.
iPod. With the iPod,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
When the iPod came out, all of a sudden he had a device that built by someone else, so he didn't have the problem of equipment to deal with, and all he had to do was sell the concept of the listening experience, and
Right.
that was a major inflection point in that company.
Yes.
Without the
It's
iPod, they never would have succeeded.
Yeah. And there is something fun about being the first adopter when you're in you're the consumer. And, I remember going to the gym and seeing people wearing, instead of wearing the earphones that connect, and plug into your phone. I remember that phase of life when I would go to the gym and I'd see people without the wires, right? Just the little headphones that are in the in-ear thing, then you're like, oh, well, maybe I'm behind and I need to go out and see what everybody else is doing. And so there is an ego play when it comes to innovation and products that are for those consumer markets. And Audible's that's a great example. Alan, I have a question for you. And one of the things that I talk a lot about is how important it is to hook your audience at the very beginning of a presentation. And so when I opened your book, it was funny to me because I was smiling already at the pages before it was even your writing. I actually had a hook moment when I read from um, the the first page of page it's like page IX with Sir Ronald Cohen, right?
Yes, yeah.
And here's what he wrote, and I have a question about this. He said in 1969, the world had a limited understanding of the important role that ambition, entrepreneurs, and fast-growing small businesses would play in society and the broader economy. Most people believed that large, traditional firms would be the ones to bring technology to market, create employment, and experiment with new ways of doing things. And I completely resonate with that because my first job out of college was at a place on Michigan Avenue in the Wrigley Building at BBDO Chicago. And in 2 years, in the year 1999, it would have been, we won our first ever .com client, ethnicgrocer.com. I was on the new business pitch team. It was a company backed by Kleiner Perkins, Integral Capital Partners, Benchmark, and Merrill Lynch for $42 million. But Alan, it went completely bust in just 2 short years, right before we at the ad agency were able to launch all this creative that they had asked us to make for them. TV, print, digital, the whole bit. They lost the investment backers, they lost all this money, and the deal went south, and they were just too early for their time. And I think back now, I didn't even realize what venture capital really was at that moment. That was the late 90s. I was in my early 20s. When did you begin to see kind of this surge of public perception getting better about VC in general? Because, I didn't really even realize till I started working with founders and fund managers myself in the last 10 years what the impact has been on innovation from the VC landscape. What has been your observation of public perception of VC?
Well, in the 1970s, it was a totally new idea,
Hmm.
and that was a period of, I mean, the name didn't even exist
Yeah.
until about 73 or 74. It was the deal business.
Hmm.
But,
Okay.
gradually firms got formed like mine that call themselves venture capitalists, and that became the the watchword of the industry, which was it then became today it certainly definitely is an industry. There are thousands of firms,
Yep.
more than hundreds. There are thousands, uh, uh, but I'd say it got very very hot. Well, the venture industry gets hot when the IPO market gets hot
Right.
because
Okay.
when you have a hot IPO, all the venture deals go public, and then everybody says, if they can do it, why can't I? And I want to put money in a venture firm because I want to participate, just like Joe.
Right.
And I think that built up steam when the internet came out in the 90s,
Yep.
and it hit its peak at the time of the bubble, in 1990, 1996 or 1997. I mean, I'd say the bubble dates from 98 to or two. I mean,
Okay.
that 3 or 4 years was very, very heady because public stock prices were going crazy. I think I may have illustrated in the book or brought up the fact that I gave a speech in March of 2000, I think, at Columbia. I don't know if did I include that in the
Yes.
book? Yeah,
Yes. But
yeah,
keep going.
and it was a definitive speech because I really had prescience, and it was all based on my security analysis training
Okay.
because what I saw was there were a couple of companies that were holding companies.
Mm-hmm.
I assume you understand a holding company owns other companies.
Sure.
Uh,
Yep.
and the holding company, the famous one, was Christiana Securities, which owned DuPont. And there was Tricontinental Corporation, which owned a fund underneath it. And usually the holding company, for some odd reason, sold at a discount to the underlying value. So you'd say, why should I buy Tricontinental when I can buy the underlying holding at a cheaper price? But people wanted to seem to want to have these holding companies that were considered a better asset. Well, as I said in the book, there was a company called it was called ICG, but it was a holding company that owned about 200 internet companies, and
Okay.
this company was selling at an astronomical price earnings ratio, uh, price to value ratio. From every standpoint was huge, and the underlying companies were all internet companies. And so here was a holding company that was selling at an extraordinary price that was a premium to what each of its individual holdings was selling at. And I knew not all their portfolio, but everything I knew in their portfolio was overpriced. So
Okay.
I said to myself, why would anyone buy this holding company at a premium when that's not normally the case? And
Right.
and they're and they own the underlying assets they own, in my opinion, are all way, way, way overpriced. This was a signal to me that the market had reached a point of irrational exuberance,
Right.
To quote Alan Greenspan,
Yes.
and to me, and it, it's accidental, but it kind of marked the end of an era. Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
Interesting.
I don't think anyone's going to write a book and say Alan Patricof on March 31st, called the
Right.
end of the internet, but it was pretty close to the timing, but it was based on fundamental security analysis.
hmm I love that that was your initial first job, and then you're already seeing these things translate so many years later as you're addressing Columbia graduates. What happened after that? What did you notice in the next, decade or so beyond that moment
Well,
after the shift?
Well, the year 2000, or from 98 to 2004, were pretty bloody.
Mm-hmm.
There were no IPOs. Companies were going out of business every day.
Right.
Uh, as I said again in the book, that every there was some company going out of business every week
Mm-hmm.
who couldn't make their payroll.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Right.
and that finally got absorbed, and the market got smarter, and
Mm-hmm.
those companies, uh, a lot of them went out of business,
Right.
and there were some viable, real companies in there, and they survived.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Do you have time for two more questions, Alan?
Sure, sure,
Okay.
sure. Two more
I would
only.
love to, we talk a lot about the balance of head and heart in persuasion. And Aristotle talks about his theory of persuasion as ethos, pathos, logos, credibility, heart, head, logic. And you love art. And I think that's just beautiful and so interesting that you have such a blend of, head and logic, passion with all that you've done in your VC world, but you love art and you love theater and you find a way for that balancing act to kind of be a part of your life. So, can you share a little bit about any recent art purchases or galleries that you're interested in heading to, or just some basic thoughts about what fills you about art?
Well, I mean, I still uh, participate in the art industry in the sense that I still am a regular visitor at art
Hmm.
galleries. I
Hmm.
still go, and you should know, if you don't, I married, it's not in the book now, I married one of the leading art consultants.
Okay.
Had nothing to do with my art interests. We just,
Okay.
it was my interest in her. And
Hmm.
so she's someone who puts collections together and then
Amazing.
disposes of it for other people. But we share that mutual interest.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but she's much more professor. She's an art
Hmm.
historian. Uh,
Hmm.
but so the reason I mention is we go to Art Freeze in
Hmm.
Miami, we go to Freeze in New York, we go to Freeze in California, we go to
Hmm.
Freeze, we go to Art Basel, we go to, if there's any art auction event going on, we go to it.
Yeah.
Uh, and uh, it's just an interest in it. I like going to galleries. Uh, we just went. There was a Louise Nevelson show open recently, and both of us know the gallery owner, and we can only go at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the gallery opened at 10, and we ended up getting them to open it up early. Uh, we go to. I mean, we really do lots of things related to the art business. But for example, my wife just sent me a note, said that one of the big investment firms is having the the head curator of the Metropolitan Museum speaking at a dinner. We're going to go to. We went to a UBS art dinner for their clients. Uh, it's either you have an interest or you don't. I mean, uh, I'm trying to think of. I just bought uh, two paintings by a woman named Alea Chapin, who
Hmm.
is. I bought it from the. I bought one from the Flowers Gallery in London,
Okay.
who I was, went to Angela Flowers in 1970,
Yeah.
and now I'm going to her Matthew Flowers, her son,
Oh, I
because
love it.
she passed away, and then I bought
Okay.
the second one at the New York Academy of Arts,
Yep. Yep. I love it.
which which
My,
is which is run by happens to be my wife's sister is the head of it, and they run two events a year, and one of them is coming up in a couple of weeks, and so I mean we're in the art world. We know artists, we
yep.
know gallery owners. Uh, and it's just part of my life. And in fact, one of the interesting things I don't think is in the book at all is that when I have young people working for me, I always like to take them out for a lunch tour
Yep.
and go around and see some galleries just to give them a
Yeah.
more, try to introduce them the idea there's something more than investing in venture capital
Yeah.
deals.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
My
I'm a strong believer. One of the reasons I wrote the book was to encourage young people to do other things than whatever their profession was, and
yes.
to build themselves into a multi-dimensional person.
Right. Right. I think one of my favorite viewpoints of you was when you would take younger folks come and bring them into meetings just to observe and to watch how things unfold and give them the education of experience. And I definitely had that with some of the leaders that I worked with early on in my career at the global ad agency and then in global PR. I had the opportunity to observe how leaders think, how they make decisions, how they present when the client's there and how they prepare when the client's not there, how they sit, how they stand. All these things matter when it comes to forming these other generations coming up underneath us. And I have a daughter who just graduated from the University of Texas with an art history degree. Who's a really talented artist and loves museum curation and assembling
Has
rooms. And
she got a job yet?
not yet.
It's hard. It's
It is
hard.
hard. She's considering some other options prior to the museum road, but we're open to anything, of course, at this point in time. Absolutely. Well, Alan, tell us just quickly as we wrap up here, what's on your horizon with this new kind of white space you've identified of those baby boomers who are coming of age and want something more to do. My dad is 81. My grandfather is, or my father-in-law is 86, and I just think that's a great and interesting idea that you've come up with as you get
Well,
to
well, I think,
this.
it's interesting when you think about the subject, longevity, aging,
Yeah.
wellness. Uh, you'd say to yourself, you think about it, why did the caveman must have thought about how do I live, how do I stay alive and live a couple of years longer? Uh,
Right.
every point in history, people must have done something to think about. They took drinks or they did
Mm-hmm.
something. Uh, but in terms of my awareness, my parents had no interest at all, or never even thought about the idea of how do I live longer, or
Mm-hmm.
I should exercise, or I should eat better. It just wasn't there,
Yeah.
and I would say I feel silly even saying it, but I think it's a phenomena of the last 10 years that
Mm-hmm.
people all of a sudden, and even more so in the last 2 or 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
have
Yes.
gotten really interested and thinking about it. And you have all kinds of companies. We've made one investment in a company called Centogenics, which
Mm-hmm.
runs 20 clinics around the country. But
Mm-hmm.
there are, maybe it started with the golden door, people going away and taking care of it. But those were really more to, get your body in shape.
Right.
But then, and then meditation added to that, and nutritional retreats, and cleansing,
Yeah.
and getting yourself. I mean, I always laugh when I hear about these women I know who go away to retreats in Costa Rica or even in Malibu and spend $5,000 for the week to go to some place where
Right.
no terrible accommodations, to get no food for a week, and feel like they really are fabulous. They come home and they paid for, but it's because everybody wants to do something that can help them live longer, and longevity is like the top of mind for everybody. There's not a day or a week that goes by where there's not an article or talk,
Yep.
book. This guy Peter Attia has written a book recently. Uh, I mean, there's so many books that are coming out, and people have different concepts, and they're starting uh, different companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so 5 years ago, I got involved with this woman who we both had invested in, Ariana Huffington's company, Thrive Global, which was about wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And we said this is a great place to invest. So we've been
Yeah.
investing in companies that are developing products and services and technologies that are, I mean, we're not investing in senior living facilities. We're not investing in
Mm-hmm.
drugs,
Mm-hmm.
but there's so much, and the fastest growing part of the population are people
Yeah.
over 60.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
Yep. There
it's
was just
only,
an article yesterday on aging and longevity in the Wall Street Journal. It was a big spread over the weekend. I was reading about that. So, yeah.
yeah. And I mean, ironically, I was invited to Barcelona a month ago by the International American Development Bank, which is like the equivalent of the World Bank for South America. They
Okay.
were having their annual meeting in Barcelona, and they were inviting me to be the keynote speaker because the thesis of the annual meeting was wellness and aging,
Mm-hmm.
because South America has a huge problem of an aging
Right.
population,
Right.
and all these banks are trying to figure out what do we do about it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Japan, my partner Abby was in Japan last week, and
Mm-hmm.
she said they're really
Yeah.
worried because their
Right.
population of
Mm-hmm.
younger people is getting smaller, and they
Mm-hmm.
more people that they
Yeah.
have to, and they're not happy about having to take care of all these older
Right.
people.
Right. Not enough new people, new birth rate problems, and all
And
these
it's
kinds of
it
things.
exists in South America, it exists in Japan, China, Europe,
Yeah.
and the United States.
Yeah.
So it's a burgeoning area.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
I feel was prescient about seeing
Mm-hmm.
this
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Do you have one final word of advice for all those leaders out there who are trying to improve in their messaging skills, their credibility, their ingenuity? Any thoughts you'd like to leave with anyone listening?
Well, I would rather focus on what's the secret. I'm 90 years old. What's the
Yeah.
secret of living to 90, and
Yeah.
how am I going to live to 114?
Okay, let's do that instead.
And it's not through any great elixir.
Right.
It starts out every day with a positive attitude.
Hmm.
You have to get up in the morning and think positively. Forget the word no,
Hmm.
and be willing to try anything.
Yeah.
Have the curiosity to try things.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of new ideas. Reinvent yourself. Just because you're 60, if you follow my thesis, you've only
Mhm.
lived half your life, so you've got the
Yeah,
other half to live.
that's
Live the
right.
first half with in an eclectic way that you look back on it and say, I've done some really exciting things in my life. Not that I'm the best lawyer and all I did was briefs.
Hmm.
Uh,
Right.
and exercise. I exercise regularly. Walking is the most valuable exercise you can have. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, the biggest secret I have is my wife and I. I just got married last year again.
Yep.
We split
Congratulations.
we split every single meal that we eat together,
Really?
breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and we've been doing it for 3 years. And it's amazing how it helps us. We didn't do it for weight control, but we did it because uh, dinners, when you go out any place,
Oh, gee.
it's
So
so
much
much,
food. Yes.
and you find. I went out for dinner the other night, and you're not part of this. Ordered spare ribs, and they delivered three slabs. My wife had one, I had one, and there was one left over. I
Yeah,
mean,
for
but
sure.
that's that. If you go out and you have veal piccata, you'll find three slabs. Or any, it just the portions are very large, and what happens if it's in front of us, we eat it.
Right,
So
right, exactly.
so I'm disciplined in eating. I weigh myself twice a day.
Really
And
interesting.
if I increase by more than 3 pounds uh, in the evening, eliminate one meal the next day.
Okay.
So it's, and I'm not contrived or,
Yeah.
none of this is forceful. It's just
Hmm.
that's the way I live my life,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
take invitations to do podcasts.
Yes, you do. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, yeah. The only thing with podcasts is, unfortunately, you don't end up buying my books because usually I give a lot of talks, and the requirement is that people buy, well, more than one. They
I
buy,
know.
50 or 100. When I
Yes.
went to Barcelona, they bought 200.
Yeah.
That's the only way you can sell books there. You can't.
That's
It's very
true.
hard to.
I'm not writing my book to sell one at a time either.
It's almost impossible to sell it one
Yep.
at a time.
Yes.
So anyhow, I think the one thing I would say is have develop a sense of curiosity
Yeah.
that makes you open-minded to try things.
Yeah. Well, I have loved learning about and reading about your curiosity for life and business and art and people and building relationships. And I learned a lot from reading your book. And so I'm grateful to you, Alan, for taking
Okay.
time today. And
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
And thank Toby.
I will.